we might want to come back to this call later on. And Javier, hello Lida.
Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Good to see you, and good to see you all. So I think we'll get started, and I'll just get the ball rolling by spending a few minutes of our precious time first, and then we'll get into introducing my companions, co-hosts of this call, and I am going also to probably bring some of the rest of you into the conversations by sharing your experiences from sprints that some of you have been doing. So don't expect that you can background this call and do some more important stuff. No, I'm going to call on several of you during the session here. So pay attention, guys, right? This is the session of the year, as I said. So let me just share a couple of slides. This is not going to be slide heavy. This is going to be conversational, but I do want to just be a little bit visual as well. And I'm calling this kind of session for ExOperiences. And it's actually ExOperiences call number 4. And I've been playing with the words, right? What should we call this kind of thing? But really, I'm super passionate about the whole community thing, that we can collaborate, we can support each other, we learn from each other, and there is really no better way than getting together once in a while, like we're doing here, to share some war stories, some lessons learned, some best practices and next practices and all of that, and just learn together. So I said this is call number 4, and we have the recordings as well from the previous calls, and I'll share the links to those videos after this session. But the first one was actually back in August with Dea and Patrick and Augusto. We talked about consulting and coaching and other interesting things, but a lot on the sales process. As a matter of fact, how do you turn a lead into a sale? What's the value proposition? Who are you talking to on the client side to make that happen, and all that stuff? And then in September, I met with Christina Maria and Francisco Milagros for a super interesting conversation as well. Wolfgang and Eunice joined me in October, talking about also interesting stuff like how to advise and how to coach and other interesting stuff. All of this stuff is actually in the media library, although technically I think we've had some challenges getting everybody to access this, but it should be in the media library. But if not, then anyway, I'm going to send you the links to all the now 4 recordings that we have in the library. So something that really triggered me for this agenda today was actually a sprint participant in a sprint that I was just part of finishing a few weeks ago here in Thailand. I'm still hanging around in Thailand, so apologies for the tuk-tuks and other noisy things passing by from time to time in the background. One of the sprint participants said, as we had gone kind of 1 or 2 weeks into the second half of the sprint, she had a realization, kind of, and maybe an epiphany, and she said, hey, the second half of the sprint is like starting all over again, but in a good way. And I think that was a remarkable way of actually describing it, because in my opinion, that's pretty much what we do. We do run a similar process a second time in the second part of the sprint, and we're going to talk more about that later. So that was just the voice of a customer, how they saw the second part of the sprint. So I decided that we should talk more about the second part of the sprint, also because in our training and certification, we focus a lot on the first part of the sprint, given the time constraints that we normally have. So we don't really spend so much time on the second half of the sprint. So let's do that in this session. And here's, by the way, a postcard from another sprint participant in this sprint, that it is eye-opening to do these sprints. You're going to unlock so many potentials, and you're going to enjoy it. Today I enjoy being the co-host together with two amazing gentlemen that you all know. So maybe we should let them introduce themselves, primarily maybe by mentioning a couple of some of the sprints that they have been part of, and maybe just say a few things that we probably don't know about them. I don't know. What do you think? Over to you first, Diego, to introduce yourself briefly. Welcome.
Okay. Hi, hello everyone. Nice to see you again, and thanks, Lars, for the invite. So I'm going to start with something that you might not know of me. I think I already mentioned with many of you that I'm an architect, but maybe you're not familiar with my artistic side. I've been doing some artistic pieces, like really large urban art that mixes art and technology together with a group of artists. And we do some crazy stuff like try to create huge rainbows in cities, or try to understand what the pulse of the city means. So that is something you don't know. You probably know me from the ecosystem. You know that I am acting as a master trainer in both coach and consultant certifications. And I've been quite active on the EXO ecosystem and movement since I was exposed to it back on the days in I think it was 2013 or so, the first time that I heard about EXO, and then the book, and then EXO, the movement, came to be around precisely the book, 100 people that united around the book and the idea that we could start applying these concepts to large organizations. So that is what I've been doing for the last 5 years, I would say. I've participated in several sprints, from the very first one, the foundational sprint, in which I happily met Lars. And since then, I think I've been involved in, well, my profile at EXO says that I've been involved in more than 65 actions related. And I would say that at least 15 of those have been sprint related. And in those sprints, I've covered several roles as a head coach or as a coach, coach for the edge and coach for the core. I've also been an advisor and a disruptor. And the reason why I stick around, I'm still here, is because I really trust this process to be transformational. I'm really passionate to see and to identify the moment in which participants do the click, change their mindset. And I think that is the best prize or award that I can get from this experience. On top of that, the accelerated learning. I mean, the amount of people that you meet in this context and how interesting these people are is definitely a motivator for myself. So I have participated in many of sprints, and hopefully during this conversation, I'll be able to share with you some experiences. Hope this is enough, Lars, for an intro.
It's a wonderful start, Diego. Thank you so much. And the second gentleman, who is my co-host today, is Soul. And over to you, Soul. Tell us a little bit about Soul that we don't know yet.
Hi guys, I've just noticed how serious me and Diego look at the pictures. So just say we're not that serious. So yes, so something you don't know about me. Maybe some of you know I write poetry, so I've won prizes in international competitions for my poetry. So some of you might know that. Probably don't know that I train capoeira, which is a Brazilian martial art. And or I used to do street dancing when I was younger, so body popping and things like that. So maybe one day if I'm had a few drinks at an EXO party, you might see some of that come out. So my background in EXO is I'm an EXO coach. I'm also part of the core team, so I work with Emily at EXO Works, and what I'm working on there is improvements to the sprint process and changes, which Diego is kindly helping me with, as well as some other head coaches, and kind of tweaks to the way EXO Works runs its things. Also looking at selling sprints into clients, premium clients, and delivery there. And the kind of how do we improve elements of the coach training as well. I'm looking into that too. My involvement in sprints is actually, I've not got the same experience that Diego has. So I shadowed on a couple of sprints. So one was Boston Scientific, which was a premium sprint earlier this year. And then also at Bitdefender, which was a virtual sprint that was run this year. And I was a coach on the Vodacom sprint, which was in South Africa this year as well. But now my focus is back on working on the core team. And I've been involved with the EXO ecosystem for about 2 years. And as Diego said, my main reason for being part of the ecosystem, really, I think it's the learning. There's everyone. You look at the backgrounds of everyone in the ecosystem, and it's amazing. And there's such a group of people, and so much I can learn from them. So that's my main passion of being part of the community.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, all, for doing this together today. Looking forward to learn from your ExOperiences as well. I think actually the three of us complement each other quite a bit, because there's a lot of projects where we didn't work together, but we also have a bit of overlap on different projects. So I think it's going to be a good constellation in terms of complementing each other with experiences and suggestions, so we can all learn from each other. I believe that I've been working with everyone on this call, either through training or in sprints. But maybe I should just say one thing that you probably don't know about me, just to be as vulnerable as as a gentleman I just asked to dive into the deep end of the pool. I once got lost in a nuclear plant in France, and that was interesting. The security team didn't find it very interesting. They were pretty upset about it. I was an intern. I was studying physics and math, and found that nuclear plant to be an interesting experience, but it became a little bit too intense when I got lost on a guided tour, and it took about an hour to find my way back to the main entrance, and so that was a rough start, but it played out nicely, and learned a lot from the rest of the experience. So I don't mind exploring new avenues, but sometimes the world around you don't appreciate it as much, and that was one rough experience where I learned that the hard way. So I think I'll keep it at that for now. You have all been wonderful at contributing to this call by sending questions when you registered for the call, and all the questions I've received are on this slide. However, I don't think we'll be able to cover all of these questions in the next 45 minutes that we have left, but I think we can cover a lot of the topics. We're going to do it pretty freestyle, and so we can take additional questions. If you have questions, put them in the chat. And as I said, I'm going to probably call on a few of you to also bring in some sprint experiences from recent sprints. And all in all, I hope we can all take a lot away from experiences from the last part of the sprint process, the week 6 to 10, which for some is a little bit of a mystery, and for others it's probably an exciting opportunity just to get started on next time a sprint will be starting. So let's dive into it, and I'm going to ask first Diego and then Sol the first question for today. And the question is really, what are, in your opinion, some of the key success factors during week 6 to 10, based on your own personal experience? So, Diego, why don't you go first, sir?
Okay, great. So what are the key success factors during the weeks 6 to 10? So the week 6 is very interesting. In week 6, people's emotions are kind of low, whether the result of the disruption session was really good or not, everybody's tired. So picking everybody up and their emotions and restarting the team dynamics, etc., is costly. Week number 7 is a week in which they are expected to build the MVP, and it is also kind of the team dynamic that has proven to be quite effective. Typically, by the end of week number 3, it's of paramount importance here. We really need them to focus on the critical things to be prototyped and have a clear image of what they're expecting to have by the end of that week. That is an MVP, a minimal viable product. We are seeking for validation, we are seeking for confirmation, we are seeking for support, and we need to make sure that the right questions are asked and the people are really comfortable with reaching outside. At this time of the sprint, it is also frequent that not only people are tired, but also they are overwhelmed with everything that they've been postponing until now. So finding the space and protecting the space to deliver the work, the weekly assignment, is also very important. One more overarching success factor, I would say, is the time for pivoting. We are asking people to systematically prototype and validate and improve, and that means letting go of the previous initiative or the previous assumption or the previous hypothesis, and being ready to incorporate feedback really fast to their initiatives. So the teams that do typically are pretty successful, I would say. What else? In week number 9 and 10, I would say another success factor, besides incorporating all of that feedback, is understanding the perspective of the people that are going to be attending the final session, understanding the thought process, and understanding how important the presentation and the fluidity of the presentation is. And for that, making sure that there isn't too much specialization on the teams on individual initiatives, on the people on individual initiatives, but the input from everyone in the team, I think, is also very valid. But I'm going to stop here. I'm going to let Sol start completing this with his own insights, and maybe later I can add some.
Perfect. Over to you, Sol.
Yes, so I think me, it's a lot of things. I won't repeat everything Diego said, but I agree with everything there. I think it's also around building the right experiments. So what I've seen with my sprint participants is that they struggle sometimes to figure out what was the right experiment, and you have to coach them around this. And it also can be sometimes difficult for you as well to figure out what's the right experiment which gets you the answers you're looking for, but isn't too difficult and too heavy to produce in the first instance. So what is it? Is it a mock-up? Is it an MVP? Is it a website? Is it an email shout out? So what is the right experiment that then gets you to the next phase? The other thing is that I'm becoming more conscious of is the first half of the sprint can be broken down week by week. it's very easy to do a week by week process because of the way that happens. The second half is iteration, and it's more, it doesn't fit the week by week structure as well. It's more about kind of constantly cycling through the iterations as fast as you can. So I think improving the cycle of iteration is also a success factor for week 6 to 10. Making it about learning, because obviously they've been beaten up maybe a little bit in the disrupt. So it's always about learning and taking away the idea of failure. And, you know, it's as Diego said, it's about pivoting. So it's not about, how do I put this? In school, we get taught there's one right answer. We get that right answer. If we don't get it right, it's wrong, and that's it. That's the end, right? Whereas this is teaching people to shift to a different way of thinking and looking at life. And it's the same way we learn to walk. So we know this inherently as human beings, that it's through experimentation we develop and we grow and we get answers. And another way of explaining it is we don't relate to the real world. We relate in our heads to our model of the world. And the only way we can get access to the real world is we design an experiment in the model of our world that we think is how the world works. And then the real world gives us feedback. It's not the model that gives us feedback. It's the real world gives us feedback. And then we adjust our model of the world based on real data we're getting in. So that's kind of the way I look at also the second half of the sprint. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Great.
Can I add one more?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, I would like to add one more thing that all of you have heard me saying before, probably, which is the focus, the understanding what is the differentiating thing, the differentiating value proposition or aspect of your initiative, and focusing on that. That means really understanding and being updated to what's happening outside, meaning doing your benchmark research and really understanding what's different and what are the kind of questions that the people working in the same problem space are asking themselves, and building all of your narrative around precisely that specificity and that difference. Because otherwise, I mean, it's gonna, the project's gonna lack specificity, and then you know, they lack interest. People, potential investors, potential sponsors don't really have a clear image of what they're investing on, and that means at the end of the day, dilution. The project probably will not be taking further. So that is a strong recommendation for these weeks.
Can I also add, I think Diego and I have spoken about this a lot, is it's about finding the key hypotheses you want to be testing as well with your experiments, and really being clear on what those are and making sure that your experiments do test those hypotheses. The other important thing to consider is skill sets within the teams. So if there is a designer within the team that can build a website and that's the test you're going to do, it's very quick for that team to get that built and have feedback. Whereas if that's not their skill sets, they can find it quite difficult to get to something that they can use as part of their experiment if a mock-up or a website is part of their experimentation. So I think it's very important to be aware of the skill sets before you get to the second half, so you know where and when they need help and how to get that to them.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. And we can already tell here that the list of success factors is very long. There's a lot we can add to that list very quickly. I think I want to add a few, and maybe Suman also, in terms of your experiences from the ALEC sprint, would be interesting to hear. But let me just first share a couple of additionals for the list here. Some of the things I've come across is that the participants in almost all sprints, and I've done I think around 25 sprints now, either as head coach or coach. The participants tend to believe that this is another round of innovation theater coming from the top leadership when they start on day one. Maybe because some of them have been recruited kind of in just a few weeks before the sprint begins, and they are not well prepared. And they're showing up, and it's like, this is going to be another, as I said, round of innovation theater. We're doing it because we've been asked to. But when we get halfway into the sprint, at that point, everybody understands that this is real, And if the communication from the top sponsors of the sprint has been clear, then people start to understand, hey, this could change my career path in this company. Hey, I could be part of a new startup on the edge, and I can actually potentially be implementing the ideas that I'm developing now. And that changes the dynamic a lot in the sprint, that people start to realize this is for real. But if they don't understand that, I think then the sprint is at risk. So it's very important to communicate clearly that we are doing this for real. We intend to implement some new initiatives. We want to work differently, think differently. We will start to appreciate experimentation, trying new things, and that requires clear communication from the leadership. So that's one of the things. Another thing is cultural differences. And I've been working everywhere from Brazil, North America, Middle East, Thailand, China, kind of a bit all over the place. And in subcultures, it's not kind of, it's not, how can I say it, you don't want to be in front of your peers and admitting there's something you don't know. And usually you're seen as the person who knows all, and the person who's the leader, who makes decisions and who knows everything. And in a sprint, the game rules are changing fundamentally, and in reality we know nothing. And that's an important lesson in itself. But admitting that in front of your peers is not easy in some cultures. It's pretty easy in my own culture from Northern Europe, but in many others it's not easy. And so coaching turns into one-on-one coaching rather than group coaching to protect the individual so they can work with psychological safety and build trust with the coach and so on. So there are some dynamics there to consider as well. Enough from my side, I think. I just want to hear, Suman, I haven't prepared you for this, but you're okay. You're part of the Alex Sprint. Do you have something to add, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So purely specific to week 6 through week 10, certainly I felt that I agree that one of the key things that the way we divided week 1 through week 5, week by week, it was fairly discrete and different tasks. Week 6 through week 10 was more of, the thing has to be looked at as a holistic view. And it was all about prototype, validate, improve, and that cycle, build, measure, learn, that was going on. So the way I kind of sensed the whole week was that I set it right at the beginning, that the way I look at week 1 through week 5 is where we are achieving what is called a problem solution fit. That identify the problem, resonates with a bunch of clients or users, identify a matching solution and the users or clients are excited about it, and is there a fitment, the problem solution fit. And the week 6 through week 10 is about a product market fit. Of course, we are not going to build a product, but that's why the prototype comes into place. The the website, the landing page, or a proof of concept and stuff like that. That you have a product, you take it to the real market and talk it out with your potential clients and users. So when I give that big picture view, so offering the big picture view right at the beginning of week 1 and even in week 6, reiterating the point, what did we do in week 1 through 5 and what are we going to do week 6 through 10? I think that kind of really helped, number one. Number two, to the extent we had to make a deviation that of course was the driver for it was a little different, because we had a huge challenge coming up in terms of people dynamics within the team. My team consisted of some of the senior most folks in the company, and they came with huge legacy immune systems, each one of them in excess of 14, 15 years with the company, with varying degree of internal equations that was not even known to me until week 7. Only on week 7, I got to know that why is really, I mean, are they like that? Or are they fighting for the sake of it? Then actually I got to know those hidden stories, what was really prompting those internal fights. So it is never too late to really know about some of their internal stuff, the history that they carry and the history, the baggage they are carrying into the sprint team. And very often you may not be even aware of them, even as late as 7th week. But it all helped. So eventually all's well that ends well. Yeah, so it worked out very well. But those are some of the key things I just wanted to highlight. There are several more. The list is long. In fact, I have shared quite a few of my learnings with a few folks, including Diego and Sol. And I'm happy to talk them more about it later on. Yeah.
Perfect, Suman. That was great, great addition. I'm going to open up. I know there's a few questions from this group here to Diego and Sol and Suman. So let's open up for questions.
Carol, yeah. Can I go first?
Yes, Carol, go first.
Yeah. Although I didn't go through the week 6 to week 10 in the coach certification, but because I've done quite a lot of work around design thinking when we talk about prototyping and MVP, I wonder, right, because when I was reading the exponential transformation book, I wonder the MVP is defined in week 6, right? Is more like a rough prototype because you need to get it done quickly to validate your hypothesis again. And how much, what's the level of resolution of the prototype? Normally some client define MVP needs to be able to like roll out to like maybe a group of early adopters, a number of maybe 50, I think the early prototype of in week 6, right, that is not possible, but maybe later iteration in week 7 or week 8 could be possible. That's my interpretation. So I just want to hear some experience, what's the level of resolution of the prototype when you say MVP? Because when I told the client that we're going to build a minimum viable product in week 6, then he said, oh, can it be done in a week? And then I explained the definition of MVP to clarify, because some client actually put out a request to actually build a product, and the vendor will say to build a minimum viable product, they need 6 weeks just to build a minimum viable product. So the definition somehow need to be clarified. So maybe you could share your experience. Yeah, appreciate that. Tiago or
okay. I think you've touched into something really interesting. I mean, we have very many weeks in which it's all about experimentation, validation, hypothesis, prototype, so testing. So there is, in my opinion, some confusion around the terms. How is prototyping different from experimenting or building an MVP? So my answer to that is by week number 7, typically we're building the MVP understood as a minimum viable prototype. Okay, and the resolution of the prototype is going to depend on the purpose of the prototype. It's not the same to try to seek for validation, try to communicate your value proposition. So the granularity, sorry, the resolution is always going to depend on the purpose. Remember that a prototyping an experience, for example, can be done without actual functionalities. You can do the Wizard of Oz, and that still might suffice to get feedback, to get validation, to get even investment or a potential client interested, okay? So that is the kind of purpose that I would say that we are aiming. And I would agree with you that the definition of the minimal viable product might be a little too early. Nevertheless, I've been in sprints in which that has happened. For example, in Rossini, we were able to come up with an alternative design system, and actually an alternative design for a suspension component that was prototype, was 3D printed and was tested actually with their normal testing mechanisms. And it did act as a minimum viable product, because investment happened around and after seeing that product, or that that experiment. But I would agree with you that saying a minimum viable prototype, sorry, a product, and understanding it as use typically out would be.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, you're right. Because some client need to ask budget for building a minimum viable product. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So, do you want to go first, or should I? Over to you.
I'll go briefly. I agree completely with what Diego said. He alluded to, in the traditional sense, the minimum viable product, if it's a product, actually performs the functionality to some degree or another that you're looking for from the final service or offering. And that's very difficult to get to in the second half of the sprint. I look at things like mock-ups or minimum viable tests. I mean, it depends also on the initiative. So sometimes the initiatives can not lend themselves easily to even a prototype. It's a testing of the appetite of the market that you need. So I mean, I've even been, I was on an advisor call, and the advisor advised my team that just sending an email to the staff members and seeing how many people clicked on that email was enough of a test in the initial, and it's not that that's the only experiment you design, but that was enough to do the first round of the experimentation in the second half of the sprint. And then you can build on that experiment over time, but he would almost start there with something quick and easy.
Excellent. I can support totally from what I've experienced, what Diego and Sol are saying here. At first, we're talking about a prototype and not an MVP. All right, and a prototype is even a low fidelity prototype, and I think it's very important to help the sprint teams understand what that means, because it's very easy for them to spend 2 weeks trying to build a low fidelity prototype, but it should be something you can build in 2 or 3 hours, in my opinion, and you can do that, right? You can build something visual. You can build a wireframe. You can build could be an email campaign through MailChimp, and you see the results, and you can have that done in 1 or 2 days. And the whole point here is you have to learn very quickly whether you can validate or invalidate your Crooked hypothesis. It has to happen very fast. You cannot spend 2 weeks doing that. And you typically invalidate most of your hypotheses in reality if you do the real battle test, right? So for that reason alone, you shouldn't start building a product. So you need to see the validation of your hypothesis first. And that happens typically not until I would say week 6, 7, sometimes even later. When that happens, then I've seen MVPs being built during sprints, and I've seen quite a few very successful MVPs. Visa in Brazil, I was the head coach on that sprint, and they built a payment app that could use for mass transportation systems. They even brought in the whole gate that opens up and let you walk into the train once you have paid through the app. And they built all of that in 8 days, including a weekend, part of the sprint, and it was ready for the launch workshop at the end. So this can be done. Sometimes you need to bring in external resources that know how to build the technical side of these things, but that's another side of the story.
I would like to add one more thing. We keep on thinking, when we think in terms of prototype, we keep on thinking on physicality, but maybe sometimes what we need to prototype is the experience itself. So there's not necessarily any physical thing involved, or at least nothing that you need to produce yourself or to fabricate. I'm thinking of some alumni that I had in the past. They were trying to validate to what extent people will be ready to use their phones without anything but voice messages. So their prototype, actually, to prototype the validity of their value proposition, and was having one person try to dictate everything to the phone instead of writing the things. And because that wasn't still possible, that meant that another friend of his would be with him the whole day, and they would act as the translator, as the voice to text translator. So, you know, there isn't much technology involved in that process, and still there was a prototyping experience that helped or not validate their approach. So I would insist on incorporating a broader perspective to what a prototype and how to seek validation.
Great. I think this is a big topic of its own, but I'd like to move on to touch on other aspects of week 6 to 10. So with your permission, I'm going to park the prototyping part. That was super interesting. We had a great conversation around that. We might schedule a whole separate webinar just on prototyping in the new year. It's certainly worthwhile the time invested. But let's switch to another topic. And out of the list of questions here, I think we have touched on quite a few of them already, including experience with prototypes and problem solution fit a little bit as well. Let's talk now about the effort and time distribution, engagement management, these things. This can be something that is like putting fuel on a fire for some. The fight also with line managers and expectation setting and all of that. So I don't know where to begin, but maybe Diego is the person to kick off on effort, time distribution, engagement management, expectation management. What are your experiences, Diego?
So when the sprints go well and we have a strong support from the leadership and the teams are really enjoying the initiatives, typically what happens is that they are pursuing something that really is aligned with their own MTPs. Like they really want to do, to be successful with their initiative because they have a strong emotional feeling for that initiative, and that ends up that results frequently in a lot of time dedicated to the initiatives. So our expectation or our suggestion is that they dedicate 20 hours per week at minimum, 20% of the time at minimum. And in some cases, we've seen 70% of the time dedicated. This was really rare, but we saw a client that dedicated that much time. I would say actually that the output wasn't necessarily so different. When you reach the level of a 40% dedication, time dedication, not anything north to that, I don't know to what extent it's really going to make a huge of a difference on the initiative. What we're creating with this sprint is an umbrella, a legitimating umbrella for a different kind of behavior, different kind of thinking, different kind of process, and using a different tool, different dynamics, etc. And that legitimating umbrella is really strong at the beginning of the sprint. We have the awake session, everybody's really excited, but it does lose the effectiveness, and it needs to be reinforced by week 6 and week 7. And that means bringing the sponsors and having the sponsors communicate to the participants that they are still legitimated for that behavior, and the mandate still applies. We want to understand what disruption is, what disruption might be, and even become the disruptors. Because I've seen very often that the teams end up having awesome projects, but because they don't feel the needed support from the sponsors, they no longer feel entitled. So that entitlement and that support, that participation from sponsors is very important. And going back to the question of the time, I would say it's always an issue. I mean, 10 weeks is a long period, and we're dealing with a lot of participants. There are a lot of things going on in everybody's lives, and on top of that, their daily work and their common work. So it's very frequent to have people that at some point or another are missing in 1 week or so during the process. But if a person misses or skips 2 weeks, that'll be way too much. And I typically call them and say, hey, I mean, there's no way you can catch up if you don't re-enter full steam. So maybe you should consider communicating this to your team, or being much more active, or trying to find legitimacy from your boss or from your sponsor to make sure that you allocate the required amount of time. I'll just end saying that the pressure that you feel during the training is a good representation of the pressure that the participants feel during the real sprint.
Great stuff, Diego. So?
Yeah, could I clarify the question? Is it with regards to the time for the second half of the sprint? I'm trying to figure out what the exact nuance is.
Yeah. We are focusing primarily right now on the time allocation, the effort that's required in the second part of the sprint. Seen from your experience.
Does that mean relative to the first half, or just?
I think it would be great to refer to the first part. Are we ramping up time allocation and yeah?
Yeah. So I, in my mind, again, this is just my view. I see that most projects or traditional projects follow a linear path from beginning to end. Maybe a little bit of it like Experiment, but they're quite straightforward. Whereas with the sprint, you always see these accelerations just before disrupt, especially, you say massive change in the quality of output and the level of effort being put in. And I think it's the same across the whole sprint. I don't necessarily think that it's more time. I think things are becoming maybe clearer and more solid, like what they're working on. So you can actually, you can be clearer with what you're doing on those things. Counterintuitive to that, though, is you're now asking teams to work in a fashion they're not used to, in an iterative fashion. Often you're asking them to work in something that's quite ambiguous. So this is something that when I worked as a strategy consultant, I found the hardest thing to learn was when you don't have all of the answers or all of the research to take the next step, right? And I think this is what teams also struggle with in the second half is they're so used to, or we as people are so used to having most of what we need to get to the next step, and actually learning to get people to the point where they might not know what they're doing on Thursday, but they know if it's Monday, they don't know what they're going to do on Thursday, but they know what they're going to do on Tuesday and halfway through Wednesday. So do that bit. And by the time you get to Wednesday morning, you know what you kind of got to do for the next day. So kind of pushing them that way, you'll have more information and more data and then keeping going. So it's maybe not a time thing. It's just a shifting the way they're thinking. That's how I'd look at it. And I'm saying it's not always easy to do this because again, my experience with my team on Vodacom was they were quite low energy and they weren't very good at working in an ambiguous environment. So I had to keep pushing them quite hard to get them to keep doing that.
It is indeed a new way of working for pretty much everybody that are joining a sprint like this. Suman, would you have some experiences to add as well to the mix?
Yeah, so one of the things I felt, as I said, my team was fairly senior and their time was quite a premium because they had to attend client meetings, which they could not avoid. They had to attend supplier meetings. It's a construction company, which is very critical. So they felt the process was fairly disruptive and demanding of their time. Now, while that is true, and I had my empathy for them, but the way I told them and managed the situation, and they kind of, got to terms with it. I said that, look, it's a kind of treat it as a managed chaos, because eventually we are preparing you to manage chaos outside the company in the industry, which you cannot even manage. Here it's within your control. So this chaos, if you think this is a bit of a chaos, this is demanding and disruptive, it in some ways it's deliberate. And if you learn how to manage all this, then it's good that you should be able to manage the potential disruption which is coming from outside. So yes, it was fairly kind of difficult for them, but they really, kind of managed, looked out for the time, and they made it happen. The other thing that also helped was something that I tried specifically in week 6 to week 10, because the thing that I observed, come Monday, their equivalent Dubai Monday is actually Sunday. That's the way the working week is organized. Come Sunday, they pretty much start with what is the slide deck, the template of the slide deck that they have to deliver on the Thursday, which is equivalent of a Friday. That becomes the target, and then they start working backwards. Learning takes a backseat. I told them very clearly, look, if that's the approach, then the whole objective will fail. Of course, we would try and do our best for deliveries, but I think the primary focus should be on learning first, and secondary should be on how well the slide deck looks like and stuff like that. So in week 6 to 10, with our head coach, Paul Epping, we kind of got to an agreement that even on Friday or Thursday, we get into a discussion mode even without the slide deck. That should be okay. Of course, that never happened. We eventually put out as a slide deck, but the whole point was around, are we really thinking directionally right and getting on the path that we really set out to do? I think that becomes more critical. And so these are the 2 points I thought I would set in terms of the expectations.
So Suman, on that note, this Chandra Desai tempted, are we aligned within the community in terms of coaches and trainers in terms of working backwards? Is the right approach, right or wrong, is probably discretionary, but do we have a definition of what is a good approach? And pragmatic, and at the same time successful basis of our experiences.
Chanda, I think it's a good question. I think there's more to this that's important to bring into the conversation. Aligning expectations with the sponsor of the sprint before the sprint begins and what outcome is desired here of the sprint is very important. And my strong recommendation is to define some learning objectives. It's very easy to say, hey, we want 3 funded initiatives. That's something easy to quantify. It's very easy to spot as a CEO and as a coach, and to also make happen. But the learning objectives for the teams is very important. As Suman talked about here, if we're just delivering the bare minimum that we expected to deliver, just to tick the box, then we are not changing our mindset. We are not acquiring new skill sets, and we are not really accomplishing any of the powerful achievements that the sprint really delivers. So it's a missed opportunity in my opinion. So setting learning objectives up front is very important to the success of the sprint, and also to make sure that learning gets acknowledged and gets rewarded. It's not just about the number of funded initiatives. There's so much more, and actually so much more that's even more important, because we cannot just create 3 funded initiatives in 10 weeks and then nothing happens the next 10 years. the organization needs to keep delivering new initiatives and develop them, test and validate them, and go through that circle on their own, probably. Yeah.
Yep, true, Lars. I agree with you.
Great, thank you very much, Chan. And that touches a bit on Horatio's question about OKRs as well for the 10 weeks. This is a long conversation that I don't think we can have today, but we have a separate work group on OKRs for exponential organizations. We haven't been that active. We've been busy doing our work, but we have quite a bit of accumulated templates now and suggestions to innovation metrics as opposed to execution metrics. And this is key when we run a sprint, that the organization typically are built on operational metrics, and now we need to move them into innovation metrics. So defining new ways of measuring success is very important, and the OKRs need to be part of that. But I think that's a long conversation, and we have something like 5 minutes left of this call today. So let's dive into that separately. I'm happy to facilitate a call in January where we talk about OKRs, because it's a big topic. It's also very important. Are there any other questions on what we have discussed so far?
I have one question. I would like to know, right, from your client experience, right? Do you face challenges during this last 5 weeks where the client asks how many rounds of iteration, and how many numbers of customer adopting in order to justify the business case? Did you have that kind of challenge in a project? We only have 50 early adopters. It's not enough to justify investment. I just want to know your experience in dealing in those situations. Anyone?
Who wants to grab that one?
I'll go first.
Okay, so
this comes down to me to the difference between something like a traditional consulting project, where you have deeper business cases, there's more knowns in the project, and it's easier to get a clearer answer, right? I think because this is not that. So clients are used to that, sometimes that kind of output, so they struggle to conceptualize what this is. Also, what we're doing is we're testing as much as possible as we can in the second half of the sprint. It doesn't mean that wherever we get to, we need $1 million of funding at the end of the sprint. It's what is the next stage, and have we got enough validation to justify the amount of money we need for the next test, not to get the whole initiative running up as fully as like a big company. So, if we've only done a certain amount of testing, but we've had good results, but it's small scale, then maybe we don't ask for the $1 million. We ask for, okay, we need $50,000 to build the next iteration of this, and that's where we go to. That's kind of, again, personal view. Obviously, you want to get as far as possible in the second half, and you want to get super far and have like an.
Yeah. But would the client say, "Oh, I've invested 10 weeks of my time, and you are still wanting to do another test"?
No, well, I don't think so. I think you've got to be careful because, there's an example I've read about online where a CEO greenlit an idea, and he was ready to spend something like $2 million on it, and the team said, "No, just give us 50,000." They validated it, and they found actually that there wasn't a business there. So instead of wasting $2 million, they only spent $50,000 on the next test, right? So actually, this is a smarter way of doing it. But you do have a point, is if the client says, I've spent all this money on a 10-week sprint, but I've only got to this stage of testing, that's the challenge. So that you do have to be as aggressive as possible in your testing in the second half. And I think that comes down to the team often and their skill and their ability to do that, not necessarily just the ability of the coach, because you can have a highly skilled team that can go very far and build a physical prototype, as Diego described. Or you can have, like, say, my team, they struggled just to get a landing page done on a website. And I'll be honest, they didn't even actually send it out to anyone to test. They built it, but took them so long and so late that particular initiative didn't even have a proper validated test done. So it does also depend on the team.
Okay, thank you.
Lars, sorry, maybe just a question from my side. You know, a lot of these sprints we tend to run with organizations or large organizations. Has anybody had any experience with running week 6 to 10 with startups? And you know, where typically it's it's a smallish group of people, probably just ideating and looking at ways of creating an initiative. You know, some experience around how you do weeks 6 to 10 with somebody like that.
The answer is yes, we do have experience. I personally have been supporting a startup called Intuitext in Romania. They do the self-provision sprint. So they ran it by the book. They have been, it's a spin-off from Bitdefender. So they, just to let you know, that they had been observing the Bitdefender sprint that we did prior. So they had quite a bit of knowledge about the process. Then they picked up the book and they ran the sprint on their own. I did support it by facilitating the Disrupt workshop and a couple of other activities. But what was your question specifically, Sanjay?
So the question I had was, you know, if I'm just listening to some of the comments that have been made so far, you know, most of the feedback is from large organizations or corporates that have run these, where you feeding back to a larger executive or a C-suite, you know, in terms of getting funding and moving forward. If I'm looking at this and I'm saying this is probably working with some startups, if one looks at week 6 to 10, you know, at the end of week 10, you're probably either pitching for funding or you're pitching for, you know, some form of investment or to scale up with somebody. What's been the experience from this group in terms of maybe directing that, shall we call it, maybe marketplace of people that would use a sprint? You know, is there any major differences between what you would do in a corporate versus a startup in week 6 to 10? Maybe that's more of the question.
Will I answer that last, or can I jump in? So I think with my experience with startups, it's startups already have their product usually, right? If you're talking very early stage where it's ideating, it's not really a startup. They're just kind of some people that have come together and want to come up with something. So what the sprint does is what I call venture building. It's actually building a venture within the organization or in the edge. It's not the same thing as startups. If we look at startups, they usually have some sense of what their product is. They usually got some sense of product market fit. So the experimentation will be around aspects of that product and product market fit and developing it, unless of course they're going to pivot. So I don't think that the process is necessarily the same. They might be as a startup doing lots of experiments, etc. But I think the second half of the sprint and the sprint process for me is more suited to a larger company or a mid-sized company, not to a startup approach. Startups are already doing a lot of this stuff because they've already gone through the ideation phase. They've figured out the problem. They've figured out part solution. They've got a bit of a product market fit. Otherwise, they wouldn't be around anymore. And they're kind of trying to develop it out. So that's how I'd look at it.
Right. I think there's also some definition aspect here. There can be startups, or we may call them startups, but they may have a product in the market. So they want to protect that business model around that product, obviously, and experiment on the edge and apply ExO attributes on the core, which can be a small core and a core that just existed for a few years. But I think it also has value to mention that startups are very often falling in love with their own product and not so much with the problem that they should be solving. And that means that sometimes they stop being open to the changes in the world around them. They may be super innovative, super smart, great at building products, all of that. We all admire them, but they fail to see that they're being disrupted because they think they've got the latest, the greatest, the most cool product out there. But reality maybe is there's an AI coming that is just going to make them irrelevant. And they need to know that. They need to be open to that. So I think the process as it is has a lot of value also for startups to take them through, to open their mind to what is happening out there that they just don't know yet. Just my 5 cents to that as well. All right. I want to be mindful about everybody's busy schedule and the fact that we're coming to the end of the 60 minutes that we have scheduled for this call. There's so much more we wanted to cover, and I'll be happy to invite you all to another session like this to dive deeper into more of these questions. So feel free to ping me with questions and suggestions for specific topics that could be interesting to discuss in a call like this. And we didn't get to answer all of the questions, but I hope this was valuable. I hope you found it helpful as you hopefully are preparing for running some sprints with your clients. It would be exciting to hear more about that work. We as a community are here to work together and help each other. So let us know what you're working on, if there's any way we can help you and guide you in that process, in your preparations. And then I just wanted to really wrap up here by thank you. Thank my partners in crime today, Sol and Diego, and also Suman was just jumping into the arena here with no preparation, and thank you very much, Suman, and thank you for all of your great questions and comments. So with that, have some happy holidays and a fantastic and exponential new year. I'm going to send out the recording of this session along with some resources that I found useful, and then let's keep the ball rolling and prepare ourselves for a transformative 2020. So thank you all for being part of this today. I wish you all the best and see you very soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Feliz Navidad para todos.
Feliz Navidad. Bye, everybody.